Hey everybody, it's time for the last of our fall festivals. I think it's one video a week for 3 weeks. That's pretty typical. The way the fall festivals usually fall. We always have Yom Teruah, followed by 8 days of confession and reflection and awe, followed by Yom Kippur. Then almost always it's just a few days before Sukkot starts. And so Sukkot has come upon us. And you know what I did? I did what I always do. I went to Rabbi David Foreman over at aleph-beta.org. And he's got a treasure trove of lessons and reflections for the festivals and the holidays that we get to learn from. And so I went and I grabbed a lecture I hadn't watched before, and I watched it and I took notes. And it's what I'm going to share with you today. So I'm going to put a link to that lecture in the description of this video so that you can go watch it firsthand, because it's about an hour and a half, 2 hours long. It's got way more detail, and it's going to be way better than what I'm going to share with you today. But I'm going to give you the short little version as something to reflect on. So, Foreman said Sukkot has some puzzling elements to it. We're told that we celebrate Sukkot because God had us sleep in Sukkot when we came out of Egypt. God had us sleep in Sukkot when we came out of Egypt. When we came out of Egypt, God had us sleep in Sukkot. Now, Sukkot is the plural form of sukkah. So every year on Sukkot, you build a sukkah, which is a structure or a tent, and you stay for 8 days, you stay in Sukkot. And the last day of Sukkot is always known as Hoshana Rabbah, right? Yes, Hoshana Rabbah, the last and greatest day of that festival, 8 days. And you remember that God had us stay in Sukkot when we came out of Egypt. Now, Foreman says one of the things that's so interesting and troubling about this holiday is every other festival and holiday seems to be about a particular point in history, like a particular story, a particular moment that you're remembering and you're recreating. You know, Passover is about that one night that we got rescued out of Egypt. There were these 10 plagues and all this stuff happening, but then that one night we stayed, we ate unleavened bread, we stayed up, and God passed over us because of the blood on the houses, and then we left that day. We left out of Egypt. Shavuot is a day where we remember the day that God gave us the 10 Commandments at Mount Sinai. That was a day. That was a moment. That was a day in history. We're remembering that day. First fruits is the first day of the harvest. So you bring in your first sheaf of the harvest and you give that. Yom Teruah is the day of trumpets. And you can talk about the days that we're being called to think about. The last 2 videos, we talked about the day at Mount Sinai, the day of Yom Kippur. We are trying to recreate that day and that moment. Everything is about a particular point in history. But Sukkot, it just seems to be about this random, ambiguous moment in time, right? So Foreman said, I went looking at the rabbis to see what the rabbis taught us in the Talmud, and I ended up being even more confused. He said, there's the instructions that were given that says we're to live in Sukkot because we're remembering about how God took care of us, provided for us as we lived in Sukkot. But then in the Talmud, the rabbis don't say that. The rabbis say we celebrate Sukkot because what we're remembering is the glory clouds, the clouds of glory that protected the Israelites. And Foreman says, but there are no clouds of glory that protect the Israelites, and that's not in any of the instructions about Sukkot in Torah. So where are the rabbis getting this from? Rabbi Foreman says, he went and dug up Rashi. And he says, I'm reading Rashi, and it seems like Rashi's lost his mind. Rashi takes these 3 verses out of Exodus, and he says, what's interesting about these 3 verses out of Exodus is all 3 verses have 72 letters in them. which I didn't even hear Foreman say whether or not that was even literally true or not. That should be something that's easy to find out. But Rashi says there's 72 letters in these 3 verses in Exodus. And if you put out those 3 verses, the 72 letters of those 3 verses, and you put them out like a grid, and you take those 72, verse 1, verse 2, verse 3, 72 letters, and then you take the 3 letters in a column, you get the 72 names of God. And Foreman's like, if this sounds to you like it's craziness, that's what it feels like to him. It feels like gibberish. Like Rashi's like, what does any of this have to do with Sukkot, with these verses in Exodus? And the 3 verses come out of Exodus. The first verse is about how when the Israelites come out of Egypt, they're going down and they're getting ready to cross the Red Sea. And they're being led by the angel of the Lord. So we're told that when they leave Egypt in the Passover story, we're told in multiple places that they followed the cloud, the pillar of cloud and the pillar of fire. That they followed the cloud. That it was their guiding. That's what they did. They followed that. They follow the cloud, and it takes them to the Red Sea, where Pharaoh is following behind them. And Pharaoh gets there, and we're told, verse 2, that the cloud that they were following moves from in front to behind the people, in between Pharaoh and the Egyptians and the people. So the cloud was the thing that they were following. They're just following the cloud. But then that cloud moves from the front of the pack and then moves to the back of the pack. And the 3rd verse is where Moses raises his hand, splits the Red Sea, his staff, splits the Red Sea, and they walk through on dry ground. It feels like all this stuff is completely unconnected to the story of Sukkot. So Rabbi Foreman says he's working with his colleague, his partner, Rabbi Imu Shalev, and Imu came to him and he said, it's just so interesting how many parallels there are between Sukkot and Pesach, Passover. Both of them occur on the 15th day of the month. Both of them are, when you're thinking about Hoshana Rabbah, both of them are 8-day celebrations. Both of them are about God saving us. On Hoshana Rabbah, the last and greatest day of the Sukkot festival, you cry out Hoshana, the great Hoshana Rabbah, right? Hoshana, Hosanna, Lord save us, Lord grant us success. And Imu says that's interesting. He says in the Exodus story, in the Pesach story, I'm told that we stayed at a place called Sukkot. That's weird. And Foreman and Imu said, what if it's possible? Do you remember how we started this? God had us sleep in Sukkot when he brought us out of Egypt. That first night when we left Egypt, God had us stay in Sukkot. It's where the story happens. It's where we find ourselves camped out against the Red Sea, and the cloud moves from in front of the people to behind the people, and we crossed. That first night, we stayed in not just Sukkot as in the plural form of sukkah. We stayed in the place called Sukkot. What if we're supposed to remember? What if it's actually not? What if Sukkot is like all the other holidays? What if it's actually calling us to remember a particular time, a particular day, a particular story, that night that we stayed in Sukkot? They said, well, do we ever learn about what the place of Sukkot is? Well, we do learn at least of another place called Sukkot. There's a place when Jacob in the book of Genesis is running from Laban. And he's on his way, he's fleeing from Laban. And we're told that he stops at a place, and it's called Sukkot, because he built pens for all of his cattle. So Jacob in Genesis is running from Laban, and he ends up stopping in a place that ends up being called Sukkot because he built pens for all of his cattle there. He had all this cattle he brought out of his time with Laban. Well, we brought cattle out of Egypt. We're told that in the story. We had all kinds of cattle. Rabbi Foreman and Rabbi Emu said, I wonder if we're supposed to see this parallel between that first day we came out of Egypt. We too built Sukkot. And we were on the run, but we had cattle too. So we had to build Sukkot, and we had to sleep with our Sukkot, with our cattle in our sukkah. We all slept together because we didn't have homes. So we all slept together in our sukkah. They said, what if the thing that we're remembering, what if the wisdom of the rabbis, what did the rabbis say in Talmud? We're not remembering that God provided for us when we slept in Sukkot. We're remembering the clouds of glory that protected the people of God. Well, what was that story on that first night when we stayed in Sukkot? But the story, according to Rashi, where God moved from in front of the people to behind. Rabbi Foreman has this big part of his lecture where he said, the clouds were never supposed to be protective clouds. The clouds were only directional. The clouds were only given to provide direction. We were never told that the clouds were going to protect us, only that the clouds were going to show us, the cloud by day and the pillar of fire by night were going to show us where to go. When they get up and leave, when the cloud and the fire leaves, we leave. Where it goes, we go. It's directional. That was its function. But when we cast our futures, when we moved out on faith, when we did what God called us to do, and we ended up staying in Sukkot, we slept in our sukkah with our cattle and our livestock, God found a way to protect us. The cloud that had one function ended up having another function. The cloud that was merely directional became a cloud, the glory cloud of protection. What if the rabbis actually knew exactly what they had found buried in the text? Rabbi Foreman says that he finds it interesting that in Pesach, in the story of Passover, we're essentially told to stay in our homes, but give up our food, eat only unleavened bread. In Sukkot, we're told to eat all of our food, but give up our homes. Move out of your home and go stay in a sukkah for 8 days. Because both of these stories are supposed to remind us about how God takes care of us when we walk out in faith. When we do the things that God's called us to do, He provides for us. When we do the things that God calls us to do, He protects us. When we do the things that God calls us to do, God makes sure that we have everything that we need. And so maybe Sukkot is a reminder, not just that for 40 years we survived with God's help. Maybe it's that. That would be enough. But maybe it's also what it was like on that first night out of Egypt. What it was like to not turn back, but to plant our feet and look out towards the wilderness and follow that cloud. And God responded to our faithfulness and our helplessness and our weakness. And God showed up and took care of us because God had us sleep in Sukkot when he brought us out of Egypt. May we remember that God often has things that we could never see coming. He often has things up his sleeves that don't necessarily make sense. He often has things that our job is to walk the path that we're called to walk. Our job is to put one foot in front of the other and chase down shalom and chase down justice and be a part of the thing that God's called us to be a part of, and to follow him and to love him with all of our heart and all of our soul and all of our might. And when we do that, we have this annual reminder. May we remember God takes care of us. He always has. He always will. May we trust the story and follow him wherever he goes. Have a great Sukkot season. And I hope that reflection is helpful. Really, honestly, go find the link from, I do these, I know it probably feels like all I do is just regurgitate Rabbi Foreman's stuff for this Festival Edition playlist. But there's just such great stuff. And I hope that it does serve as a really good commercial. You will not regret grabbing a membership to Aleph Beta and watching those lectures, learning from those lessons, diving into those series, learning from the Parashah teachings. There's so many just beautiful things buried there. And this was me for 15, 20 minutes. If you can imagine a far more thorough and a far more robust treatment of what these questions are and if you want to go deeper with any of these ideas, like, I get what you're saying, but I just wish I had more. Go find more over at Aleph Beta. They do some great work. And for all of us that are Jesus followers, Rabbi Foreman and Aleph Beta aren't Jesus followers, but you can just learn some phenomenal Jewish perspective and Jewish teaching over at Aleph Beta. So I'll put that link down there. Hopefully you enjoy learning from there. And we'll see you whenever the next holiday comes rolling around. I would bet it'll probably be maybe an Advent teaching, maybe some Hanukkah before the turn of the year. We'll see you then.